The Yazoo Land Fraud stands as one of the most scandalous episodes in early American history. In the 1790s, Georgia sold over 35 million acres of land, an area larger than present-day Alabama and Mississippi, for mere pennies per acre. Behind the scenes, bribery and corruption ran rampant. The public's outrage led to fiery protests and landmark legal battles that shaped the nation's laws. This is the story of greed, betrayal, and the fight to restore justice. In the late 18th century, Georgia was a state of immense opportunity and daunting challenges. Its western borders stretched all the way to the Mississippi River, encompassing millions of acres of fertile, undeveloped land. This vast territory was seen as both a blessing and a burden. The lands were sparsely populated by European American settlers, but were home to Native American tribes such as the Creek and Cherokee. These tribes had deep ties to the land, and their presence created tensions with the U.S. government and settlers. Treaties were often signed under duress or broken outright, leaving ownership of these lands highly contested and unstable. At the same time, land speculation was becoming a booming business across the United States. Wealthy investors and companies looked to buy vast parcels of land at low prices to resell for a profit. Georgia, struggling financially, saw selling its western lands as a way to pay off debts, stimulate settlement, and strengthen its economy. However, the land sale process lacked regulation, creating a perfect storm for corruption and exploitation. The state legislature, tasked with overseeing these transactions, was easily influenced by powerful land companies eager to profit. Many lawmakers viewed their positions as opportunities to enrich themselves. Public trust in the government was already fragile, and the speculative nature of these land sales only heightened tensions. In this climate of greed, economic ambition, and weak governance, the stage was set for one of the largest scandals in early American history, the Yazoo Land Fraud. The Yazoo Land Fraud began to take shape in 1795 when the Georgia legislature passed the Yazoo Land Act. This act authorized the sale of over 35 million acres of land, encompassing parts of present-day Alabama and Mississippi, to 4 private land companies. The sale price was astonishingly low, just 1.5 cents per acre, far below the land's true value. While officially presented as an opportunity to encourage settlement and economic growth, the reality was far darker. Behind closed doors, nearly every member of the Georgia legislature who voted for the act had been bribed by the land speculators. These speculators used gifts, cash, and shares in the land companies to secure the votes they needed. James Gunn, a U.S. Senator from Georgia, played a central role in orchestrating the scheme. He and other key figures manipulated the legislative process, ensuring the Yazoo Land Act passed despite its glaring flaws. The public's reaction to the Yazoo Act was immediate and explosive. Citizens quickly recognized that the fraud for what it was: a blatant betrayal of public trust. Many Georgians felt their state's most valuable resource, its land, was being sold off to enrich a handful of corrupt officials and speculators. Anger spread like wildfire, and calls for justice echoed throughout the state. Newspapers harshly criticized the legislators involved, amplifying public outrage. Protesters organized against the fraudulent deal, demanding the act's repeal and accountability for those responsible. The scandal quickly escalated from a legislative controversy into a full-blown political crisis. As the pressure mounted, the Yazoo Land Fraud began to unravel, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation between the people of Georgia and their government. The Yazoo Land Fraud sparked widespread outrage across Georgia. Citizens were furious that their legislature had been so easily corrupted and millions of acres of land had been sold for pennies on the dollar. The scandal galvanized Georgians to demand justice, leading to a political upheaval that would fundamentally reshape the state government. In 1796, James Jackson, a Revolutionary War hero and staunch opponent of the Yazoo Act, was elected governor of Georgia. Jackson had campaigned heavily against the corrupt legislature, promising to overturn the fraudulent deal. Once in office, he wasted no time fulfilling his promise. Jackson and his allies repealed the Yazoo Land Act, invalidating the fraudulent land sales. In a dramatic and symbolic gesture, the act was burned publicly in Georgia's capital, an event that signaled the state's determination to erase the stain of corruption. However, repealing the act did not resolve the chaos it left behind. Land speculators who had purchased Yazoo lands began to demand compensation, arguing that they had bought the land in good faith. This set off a wave of legal battles as claimants sued for their losses. The repeal also created uncertainty for settlers who had already moved onto the lands, unsure of whether they had legal rights to their property. The controversy also strained Georgia's finances and reputation. The state faced mounting pressure from the federal government to address the issue. With tensions rising and lawsuits piling up, Georgia was forced to turn to the federal government for a resolution. The Yazoo Land Fraud had become more than a state issue. It was now a national problem that demanded federal intervention. As the fallout from the Yazoo Land Fraud grew, it became clear that Georgia could not resolve the crisis on its own. The chaos surrounding land ownership and legal claims had spiraled into a national issue, forcing the federal government to step in. This marked one of the earliest examples of the federal government intervening in a state's internal affairs to maintain stability. In 1802, Georgia struck a deal with the federal government known as the Compact of 1802. Under this agreement, Georgia ceded its western land claims, covering present-day Alabama and Mississippi, to the federal government. In return, the federal government promised to pay Georgia $1.25 million and take on the responsibility of settling the disputes related to the Yazoo lands. This agreement brought some relief to Georgia's government, but the controversy was far from over. One of the key challenges was addressing the claims of landowners who had purchased Yazoo lands in good faith. These landowners demanded compensation, arguing that they should not suffer for the corruption of others. The issue reached the Supreme Court in the landmark case Fletcher v. Peck in 1810. The court ruled that the state's repeal of the Yazoo Act violated the Constitution's contract clause, as the land sales constituted binding agreements. This decision was groundbreaking. It was one of the first times the Supreme Court struck down a state law as unconstitutional, solidifying its authority to review states' actions. The ruling not only provided compensation to Yazoo claimants, but also set a precedent for federal oversight in property disputes and the protection of contractual agreements. The federal government's involvement brought an end to the immediate crisis, but the Yazoo Land Fraud remained a cautionary tale about corruption and the complexities of land speculation. The Yazoo Land Fraud left an indelible mark on American history, shaping the way corruption and governance were viewed in the early republic. For Georgia, the scandal was a painful lesson in the consequences of unchecked greed and weak government oversight. The public outrage that followed the fraud demonstrated the growing demand for accountability and political leadership. One of the most significant outcomes of the Yazoo scandal was its role in establishing legal precedents. The Supreme Court's ruling in Fletcher v. Peck not only resolved disputes over Yazoo land claims, but it also reinforced the principle that legal contracts must be upheld, even if they originated in corruption. This decision strengthened the authority of the judiciary and set a lasting precedent for federal intervention in state affairs when constitutional rights were at stake. The Compact of 1802 also had lasting effects, leading to the eventual creation of states of Alabama and Mississippi. By ceding its western lands, Georgia relinquished its territorial ambitions, allowing the federal government to take a more prominent role in westward expansion and the settlement of frontier lands. Politically, the Yazoo Land Fraud contributed to the decline of the Federalist Party in Georgia, as many of its members were implicated in the scandal. It also bolstered the careers of reformers like James Jackson, who became a symbol of integrity in a time of corruption. Today, the Yazoo Land Fraud serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and the importance of holding leaders accountable. Its legacy endures as a pivotal moment in the early history of the United States, illustrating the growing pains of young nations